Somewhere in the dense heart of Sherwood Forest, where ancient oaks grow so wide a man could sleep inside them, a legend was born. He wasn't a king, he wasn't a knight, he wasn't blessed by the church or crowned by God. He was an outlaw, a thief, a man the law wanted dead, and yet, the people loved him. They whispered his names in the fields, they sung of him in the taverns, they prayed for him when they knelt before God. Because in a world where the rich crushed the poor beneath their boots, where corrupt sheriffs and greedy kings took everything and gave back nothing, one man dared to push back. His name was Robin Hood, and today we're going to find out if he was ever real, and why it might not matter if he was. Welcome back to Golden Cattle Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, this is a channel dedicated to the stories that history never quite forgot. The heroes, the hauntings, the myths, and the mysteries that still echo through the centuries. If that's the kind of thing that gets your blood pumping, hit subscribe and stick around because this one goes deep. To understand Robin Hood, we have to understand the world that created him, and that world was not a pleasant one. We're talking about medieval England, specifically the late 14th century, roughly the 1370s and onward. This was a country still reeling from devastation. Just a few decades earlier, the Black Death had swept through England like a nightmare, killing somewhere between 30 and 50% of the entire population. Let that number sink in. In some villages, every single person was dead. And yet, the kings, the nobles, the church, they kept demanding. Taxes still had to be paid, land still had to be worked, the feudal system, already cracking at the seams, was grinding the survivors into dust. Then came the poll taxes. By 1381, peasants had had enough. The Peasants Revolt erupted, one of the most dramatic uprisings in English history. Common men and women marched on London demanding rights, demanding justice, demanding to be seen as human beings rather than property. And on top of that, the forest laws. The great forests of England, including Sherwood Forest and Nottinghamshire, were hunting grounds, but only for the royal. Common people were forbidden from hunting there, even if they were starving. Poaching could mean death or mutilation. The forest that fed the deer of kings was off limits to the families of peasants. This is the world into which Robin Hood stepped. A world desperate for a hero. A world that needed someone, anyone, to stand up and say enough. So who exactly was Robin Hood? Let's start with the oldest known reference to him. In 1377, a poet named William Langland wrote a work called Piers Plowman. In it, a character casually mentions, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he knows rhymes of Robin Hood. Not as if Robin Hood is a new idea. As if everyone already knows who he is. That's how old this legend is. By the time anyone thought to write it down, it had already been circulating in oral tradition for God knows how long. Passed from mouth to mouth, tavern to tavern, village to village. The earliest surviving complete narratives come from the late 15th and early 16th centuries, and they paint a fascinating portrait, one that's a little different from what we're used to today. In these early versions, Robin is deeply devoted to the Virgin Mary. He has special respect for women, he's a champion of the poor, yes, but he also specifically hostile toward corrupt clergy and dishonest officials. He's an expert archer, and he has a burning personal hatred for the Sheriff of Nottingham. With him, from the beginning, Little John, his enormous right-hand man, Much the Miller's son, and Will Scarlet. Notice who's missing? Maid Marian doesn't show up until later, neither does Friar Tuck. These characters were added over time as the legend evolved and expanded, pulled in from other folk tales, May Day festivals, and theatrical traditions. The version most of us know today is a synthesis of centuries of storytelling. Robin of Locksley, a dispossessed nobleman or yeoman, depending on the version, a loyal subject of King Richard the Lionheart who is off fighting the Crusades while his scheming brother Prince John, later King John, sits on the throne and bleeds the country dry. Robin lives in Sherwood Forest with his band of merry men. They rob from the rich, the corrupt nobles, the greedy clergy, the exploitative merchants, and give to the poor. He outwits the Sheriff of Nottingham at every turn. He wins archery contests in disguise, he falls in love with Maid Marian, he fights for justice with a longbow and a laugh. It's a hell of a story. And it resonated deeply, completely, across generations, because it told people something they desperately needed to hear. That the system could be beaten. That someone was watching out for the little guy. That justice, real justice, was possible even in a world that seemed designed to prevent it. Now here's the question everyone asks. Was Robin Hood real? And the short answer, supported by historians, is almost certainly not. At least, not in any way that we can prove. There's no single historical record that definitively links anyone to the Robin Hood of legend. However, and this is where it gets interesting, the name itself was not uncommon. In medieval court records, you can still find references to men named Robert Hood or Robe Hod or Robin Hood used as almost a generic term for a fugitive or outlaw. It was, in some cases, essentially a nickname for any man living outside the law. So it's possible, even plausible, that the legend grew from a composite. A dozen different outlaws, a dozen different acts of defiance against corrupt officials slowly merged and mythologized over generations into a single legendary figure. Some historians have proposed specific candidates: a Robert Hood of Wakefield from the early 14th century, a Robin Hood mentioned in records from 1226, but none of these men have ever been conclusively tied to the legendary outlaw. The evidence is tantalizing but thin. What historians do agree on is this: the legend reflects real social tensions with remarkable accuracy. The corruption of sheriffs, real. The abuse of forest laws, documented. The class warfare between landowners and the dispossessed, undeniable. The distrust of the church and state, widespread. Robin Hood may be fictional, but every injustice he fights against was absolutely real, and that might be exactly why the legend endured. Think about it this way. After the Black Death, the feudal order was collapsing. Peasants who had survived were suddenly in demand. They could negotiate wages, move from village to village, demand better treatment. A new class was emerging: the yeoman. Free men who owned their own small plots of land. People who were neither nobles nor serfs. Robin Hood spoke directly to that class. He was one of them, or at least close enough. He was skilled, self-reliant, morally righteous, and unbowed by corrupt authority. In a time when the entire social structure was being renegotiated, his story was a fantasy of what that renegotiation could look like. Not a revolution, not a massacre, just one clever, principled man and his friends making the powerful answer for what they'd done. 600 years later, Robin Hood is everywhere. The physical landscape of England is still shaped by him, or at least by the stories told about him. In Sherwood Forest, there stands a tree called the Major Oak. It's massive, ancient, gnarled, propped up now by wooden supports because it's so large and old it can barely hold itself up. Local tradition says that this is Robin Hood's hideout. Whether or not that's true, it draws visitors from around the world. There's Robin Hood's Well in Barnesdale, Robin Hood's Cave in Cresswell Crags on the border of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, Robin Hood's Stride, a dramatic rock formation on Hartle Moor, Robin Hood's Larder in Sherwood Forest, an ancient oak where he allegedly hung venison, and the churchyard in Hathersage. There's a grave said to belong to Little John, famously over 14 feet long. These places exist, people visit them, they've been named for a man who may have never lived. That is the power of a legend. In literature, Robin Hood's fingerprints are everywhere. William Shakespeare mentioned him in The Two Gentlemen of Verona, As You Like It, and Henry IV Part 2. Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, published in 1820, was arguably the work that cemented the connection between Robin Hood and King Richard the Lionheart for modern audiences. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote a play about him. He inspired comics, operas, and graphic novels. The 1938 film The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn, in a performance so charismatic it basically defined the character for a generation, is still considered a classic. And then there's Disney's 1973 animated Robin Hood, where he's a fox and somehow wormed his way into the hearts of every child who ever watched it. The legend has also been reclaimed and reinterpreted over and over again. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in 1991 with Kevin Costner, Robin Hood, Men in Tights, Mel Brooks' loving parody, the BBC television series that ran from 2006 to 2009, and countless books, from historical fiction to young adult retellings that center Maid Marian as the true hero of the story. Historically, Robin Hood was central to May Day celebrations in England, the festivals of spring, community, and renewal. He was performed in plays and games for centuries before anyone thought to write a definitive version of his story. And today, Sherwood Nature Reserves holds an annual Robin Hood Festival, a massive joyful celebration of the legend, complete with archery, jousting, costumed reenactors, and a whole lot of people who just love the story. 6 centuries, a man who never existed, and the forest still celebrates him. Here's what I find interesting about Robin Hood in the modern era. Every generation rewrites him for their own moment. In the 1930s, Errol Flynn's Robin Hood was a swashbuckling adventure hero, a fantasy of righteous resistance during the shadow of the Depression and the rise of fascism in Europe. In the Cold War era, some scholars argued that the legend had Marxist undertones, a reading that made certain people deeply uncomfortable. In the 1990s, Robin Hood became a multicultural hero given a Moorish companion named Azim, gesturing toward a more inclusive past. In the 2010s, Ridley Scott's more gritty revisionist version tried to ground the myth in something approaching historical realism. And in the 21st century, as wealth inequality has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age, as debates about taxation, housing, healthcare, and corporate power dominate public discourse, Robin Hood has become something of a cultural shorthand. Rob from those who have too much and give to those who have nothing. The phrase robbing from the rich to give to the poor has entered everyday language. We use it in political debates, in economic arguments, in conversations about justice and fairness that would have been immediately recognizable to a 14th century peasant who just paid poll tax they couldn't afford. The names change, the settings change, the details change, but the core of the story, that those in power can be corrupt, that ordinary people deserve better, that one brave, clever, and moral person can make a difference, that never changes. So, was Robin Hood real? Maybe, probably not. Almost certainly not in the way the legend tells it. But I want to offer you a different question. Does it matter? The injustices Robin Hood fought against were real. The starving peasants were real, the corrupt sheriffs were real, the forest laws were real, the poll taxes that sparked a revolt were real, the Black Death that shattered an entire civilization was real. And in the middle of all that suffering and rage and desperation, people told each other a story. A story about someone who fought back, who was clever enough, brave enough, skilled enough, and who cared enough to stand up and say, "Not on my watch." Maybe that story started with a real person long forgotten. Maybe it grew from a dozen real people stitched together by generations of storytellers. Maybe it was always pure fantasy, a dream of justice conjured by people who needed it badly enough to believe in it. What we know for certain is this. For 600 years, that story has not stopped being told. It's been sung, performed, written, filmed, painted, and whispered. In every version, the heart of it remains the same. The powerful can be challenged, the poor deserve better, and somewhere in some deep ancient forest of the human imagination, there is a man with a bow and a laugh and a righteous cause who refuses to give up. Perhaps the real story of Robin Hood isn't about one man at all. Perhaps it's about all of us, every time we've looked at something unjust and chosen not to look away. So what do you think? Was Robin Hood a real person, a myth, or something in between? I genuinely want to know your take. Drop it in the comments below. And if you know a Robin Hood story, a local legend, or a version of this tale from a different culture, I would absolutely love to hear it. If you enjoyed this journey into history and legend, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you might think. And if you want more stories like this one, folklore, folk heroes, history's strangest corners, and most powerful myths, subscribe! We do this every week. Until next time, remember, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.